The courtroom was silent except for the steady ticking of the clock mounted on the wall. Rows of people filled the benches, some craning their necks, some whispering, but most watching the drama unfold at the front. At the judge's bench sat Judge Evelyn Carter, a woman once feared for her sharp tongue and merciless verdicts. But today, she didn't look so powerful. Her wheelchair, sleek but clinical, was a silent reminder of the accident that had left her paralyzed from the waist down 2 years ago. The case before her was straightforward, or so it seemed. David Johnson, a mechanic from one of the poorest neighborhoods in Atlanta, was being tried for armed robbery. The prosecution painted him as dangerous, reckless, and guilty beyond doubt, but David kept insisting he was innocent. On the defense bench sat his 9-year-old daughter, Amira Johnson. Small, fragile, and wide-eyed, she clutched the strap of her faded backpack like it was her lifeline. The girl had sat through every hearing, never missing a single day. Her shoes were worn, her braids uneven, but there was something unshakable about the way she held herself, like a child carrying a burden far too heavy for her years. When the prosecutor finished, the silence in the courtroom returned. Judge Carter tapped her pen against the file before her. And then something happened that no one expected. Amira stood. Her small frame trembled, but her voice rang out, clear and high-pitched, piercing through the room like a bell. "Your Honor," she said, her eyes fixed on the judge, "please free my dad, he didn't do this." Gasps spread through the crowd, lawyers turned, bailiffs stiffened, Judge Carter's brows furrowed as she adjusted her glasses. "Child," she said sternly, "sit down, you are not permitted to speak during these proceedings." But Amira didn't move. She took one step forward, then another, until she was standing in the middle of the courtroom aisle, her tiny fists clenched at her sides. "If you let my daddy go," her voice shook, but she lifted her chin, "I'll heal you." A ripple of laughter burst through the courtroom. Some snickered openly, others chuckled under their breath. Even the prosecutor leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Heal me," Judge Carter repeated slowly, her tone caught between disbelief and irritation. Amira nodded firmly, her braids bouncing. "Yes, I'll make you walk again." The laughter grew louder. People shook their heads, whispering, "Crazy child, nonsense, foolish girl." But Evelyn Carter didn't laugh. She stared at Amira with eyes that narrowed, as though trying to see deeper than what was in front of her. For the first time in years, the judge's composure wavered. "Order in the court," she snapped finally, striking her gavel. The room quieted reluctantly, though smirks lingered on many faces. The bailiff moved toward Amira, but she didn't flinch. She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on the judge. "Your Honor," she whispered now, her voice softer, almost pleading, "I can help you, just give me my daddy back, please." When the courtroom adjourned that day, the buzz of disbelief followed Amira like a shadow. Reporters outside whispered about the miracle child and mocked the absurdity of her words. People laughed, shaking their heads. But deep inside, Judge Evelyn Carter couldn't shake the look in that little girl's eyes. That night, alone in her mansion with only the hum of her medical equipment for company, Evelyn found herself replaying the moment. She hadn't walked in years. Doctors had told her the spinal cord damage was permanent. She had come to accept her chair as her prison. And yet, that girl's conviction, that strange, unwavering certainty. "Absurd," Evelyn muttered, wheeling herself toward the window, but her chest felt heavy, her thoughts restless. Meanwhile, in a tiny one-room apartment across town, Amira sat curled on the mattress she shared with her father before his arrest. Her aunt, who had reluctantly taken her in, was shouting from the other room about rent and bills, but Amira hardly heard her. Her little hands clutched a silver locket around her neck, the last gift from her late mother. Inside was a faded photo of their family, smiling whole. She whispered to the photo, "Mama, I'm gonna fix this. Daddy didn't do it. I'll get him out and I'll keep my promise." For Amira believed in something no one else did. She had a gift, one she barely understood. She remembered when she was younger, touching a wounded bird and watching it flutter back to life. She remembered when her aunt had a migraine so bad she couldn't move, and how Amira had placed her little palms on her forehead and whispered, "Be better." Minutes later, her aunt's pain was gone. No one believed her, no one wanted to believe her. But Amira knew. And she knew Judge Carter needed her. 2 days later, in the middle of a rainy evening, Judge Carter heard a knock on her door. When she wheeled herself over and opened it, she froze. There stood Amira, dripping wet, her backpack slung over her shoulders, her shoes muddy. "Child, what are you doing here?" Evelyn demanded, her voice sharp. "I told you," Amira said softly, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "I can heal you, but you gotta promise you'll let my daddy go." Evelyn should have called security, she should have called the girl's guardian, but instead she sat there, staring, her heart hammering in her chest. "You don't understand," Evelyn said at last. "Your father is facing serious charges. My duty is to the law, not to—" "I understand," Amira interrupted, her small hands trembling as she gripped the arms of her backpack. "But you don't know my daddy. He fixes cars, he helps people. He didn't rob nobody, they just picked him because he's poor." Her eyes glistened with tears, but her voice didn't break. "You're a judge, you're supposed to see the truth, can't you see it?" Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it. And then Amira whispered the words that made Evelyn's blood run cold. "I know why you can't sleep at night. I know how much it hurts sitting in that chair. I can take the pain away." The room went silent. Only the sound of the rain against the windows filled the air. For the first time in years, Evelyn Carter, tough, unshakable, feared by lawyers and criminals alike, felt vulnerable. And she hated it. "You're just a little girl," Evelyn said at last, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound firm. Amira shook her head slowly. "I'm more than that. God gave me something, I don't know why, but he did, and I'm not supposed to waste it. If you let my daddy go, I'll show you." Evelyn's breath caught. She looked down at her lifeless legs, at the chair that had become part of her identity. It was ridiculous, impossible, absurd. And yet something inside her whispered, what if? What if this child wasn't lying? That night, Evelyn Carter found herself standing at a crossroads of logic and faith. The law said one thing, her heart said another. And that child, that strange child with those unshakable eyes. Could she really heal her? And if so, what would it cost? The rain had stopped by the time Amira curled herself up on the judge's leather couch, her backpack still clutched in her arms. Evelyn Carter sat a few feet away, her wheelchair parked in front of the window. She hadn't spoken for almost 10 minutes. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the occasional crack of thunder in the distance. Evelyn's mind raced. What was she doing? Why had she let this little girl walk into her home? Why hadn't she called security? And yet, she couldn't bring herself to push Amira away. "Child," Evelyn said finally, her voice low, "you should be home, your aunt must be worried sick." Amira shook her head. "She don't care, she didn't even notice I left." The words cut Evelyn deeper than she expected. She pressed her lips together, watching the girl shiver slightly from the wetness still clinging to her clothes. "I'll get you a towel," Evelyn muttered, wheeling herself toward the hallway. When she returned, she handed Amira the towel, then sighed. "You can't just appear in a judge's house, especially not mine, people would think." "I don't care what people think," Amira interrupted softly. Her eyes met Evelyn's, filled with something the older woman hadn't seen in a long time, raw faith. "I care about my daddy, and I care about you." Evelyn froze. "Me?" Later that night, when Amira had fallen asleep on the couch, Evelyn found herself staring at the little girl. She looked so small, her chest rising and falling with the innocence of dreams. Evelyn's gaze shifted to her own lap, her hands resting on legs that hadn't moved in 2 years. She remembered the accident vividly, her car spinning on the wet road, the impact crushing, the hospital's cold walls, and the doctor's words, "You'll never walk again." She remembered the humiliation of depending on others for the simplest things, the endless physical therapy, the sympathetic stares she despised. And now, this 9-year-old child had the audacity to say she could undo all of it. Absurd, impossible. Yet Evelyn couldn't dismiss the shiver that ran through her at the memory of Amira's steady gaze. The following morning, Evelyn woke to the smell of something faintly burnt. She wheeled herself to the kitchen and found Amira standing on a stool, trying to fry eggs in a pan too big for her tiny hands. "You're going to set my house on fire," Evelyn said dryly. Amira jumped. "Sorry, I just wanted to make breakfast." Evelyn should have scolded her, but instead she chuckled, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in years. "Well, at least you didn't burn the kitchen down." As they sat at the table, Evelyn finally asked, "Why do you think you can heal me?" Amira looked down at her plate. "Because I've done it before." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. On who? My aunt, when her head hurt so bad she couldn't move. A bird with a broken wing, my neighbor's baby who was sick. I put my hands on them, I prayed, and they got better. Evelyn leaned back, crossing her arms. Child, that could be coincidence. Amira shook her head stubbornly. No, it was me. God gave me this gift and he told me to use it. Evelyn wanted to laugh it off, but something about the girl's unwavering certainty stopped her. Fine, she said slowly, setting her fork down. Show me. Amira's eyes lit up. You mean it? Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. Go on, heal me. Amira slid from her chair and walked around to Evelyn. She placed her small hands gently on the judge's knees. Her touch was warm. Her eyes closed, her lips moved silently, whispering words Evelyn couldn't quite catch. For a moment, the judge felt nothing. Then something, a tingling, faint but there, a warmth spreading slowly upward from her legs. Evelyn's breath caught. But just as quickly as it began, the sensation vanished. Amira opened her eyes, her face pale with exhaustion. It's working, she whispered, but it's not finished. I need more time. Evelyn stared at her legs, willing them to move, but they didn't. She looked at Amira, ready to scold her for giving false hope, but the child's eyes were filled with sincerity, with a certainty that unsettled her. By the time court resumed the following week, whispers had spread through the city. Someone had seen Amira at the judge's home. Rumors of a strange deal between the poor girl and the paralyzed judge swirled in hushed tones. The prosecutor smirked openly at Evelyn when he saw her enter. Still playing along with fairy tales, Your Honor, he muttered under his breath. Evelyn ignored him, but her heart pounded. During the hearing, Amira sat in the front row again, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Every time Evelyn looked at her, the girl nodded as if to remind her, trust me. But Evelyn knew the law. Evidence against David Johnson was stacked high. The robbery had left a man injured, and eyewitnesses claimed David was the culprit. If Evelyn acquitted him without proof, her reputation and career would crumble. And yet, she couldn't shake the memory of the faint warmth in her legs when Amira touched her. That night, Evelyn confronted David Johnson in his holding cell. You claim you're innocent, she said, her voice sharp. Then tell me, where were you the night of the robbery? David looked her dead in the eye. At the garage, fixing a car. A customer came in late, but they never asked him to testify. They didn't want the truth. Who they? Evelyn pressed. David hesitated, then leaned closer. Ask yourself this, Judge. Why would they choose me? Why not someone else? I'm poor, black, easy to throw away. The system doesn't need proof when it comes to men like me. His words hit Evelyn harder than she wanted to admit. For years, she had prided herself on being fair, on following the law. But was justice always the same as truth? The following weekend, Amira returned to Evelyn's house, this time with a small notebook. She opened it and showed Evelyn pages filled with scribbles, prayers, and sketches of people she had touched, her aunt, the bird, the baby. This is my book, Amira explained. Mama told me to keep it. She said one day people won't believe unless I show them. Evelyn flipped through the pages, unsettled by the detail, the dates, the descriptions of healing that lined up with what Amira had claimed. She set the notebook down, her hands trembling slightly. Why me, Amira? Why are you so certain you can heal me? Amira hesitated, then whispered, because God showed me you. In my dream, you were standing, you were crying, but you were happy. The word sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. That night, Evelyn agreed to let Amira try again. They sat in the dimly lit living room. Amira placed her hands on Evelyn's legs, her eyes squeezed shut in fierce concentration. This time, the warmth was stronger. Evelyn felt it like a wave rushing through nerves she hadn't felt in years. Her hands gripped the arms of her wheelchair as her breathing quickened. And then her toes twitched. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was real. Evelyn gasped, tears filling her eyes. It's happening, Amira whispered, sweat beading on her forehead. I told you. But suddenly, Amira slumped forward, collapsing against Evelyn's lap. Amira, Evelyn cried, panic flooding her chest. The child was breathing but weak, drained. She had pushed herself too far. At that moment, Evelyn realized the truth. This wasn't a game. Whatever gift this child carried, it came at a cost. As Evelyn cradled Amira in her arms, torn between disbelief and hope, a knock rattled the door. She wheeled herself toward it and opened it to find the prosecutor standing there, his smile sharp and mocking. "Evening, Judge," he said. "Mind if I come in? We need to talk about your little miracle girl." The storm was no longer outside. It had arrived at Evelyn's doorstep. Judge Evelyn Carter's hand trembled as she held the door open. The prosecutor, Richard Hale, stood there, rain dripping from his coat, his grin cutting sharper than any knife. "I see you've got company," he said, his gaze flicking toward the small figure collapsed on Evelyn's couch. "Leave," Evelyn snapped, her voice colder than steel. But Richard stepped inside anyway, brushing past her wheelchair as though she were nothing more than a fragile piece of furniture. "Interesting thing you've got going here, Judge," he said casually. "That poor little girl sleeping under your roof. People are starting to talk." Evelyn clenched her fists. "Watch your tongue, Hale." Richard smirked. "Oh, I intend to. In fact, I intend to tell the entire city, unless, of course, you cooperate." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "What are you suggesting?" He leaned close, his breath sour with coffee and arrogance. "Keep Johnson behind bars, convict him, make it clean, no loose ends, and I won't destroy both you and that miracle child of yours." Evelyn's pulse hammered in her ears. For years she had faced criminals, liars, and power-hungry men, but this was different. Richard knew. He had seen the change in her, sensed the possibility of what Amira carried. If the world discovered the truth too soon, Amira would be hounded, exploited, torn apart by those who wanted to use her gift. Evelyn wheeled herself forward, her jaw set. "Get out of my house, Hale." He chuckled darkly. "Think about it, Judge. You've got everything to lose, and only that little girl's fantasy to gain." He left, the door slamming shut behind him. Evelyn turned back to Amira, who stirred weakly on the couch. "Judge Carter," she whispered, her voice fragile. "I'm here," Evelyn said softly, brushing damp braids away from the child's forehead. Amira's eyelids fluttered. I tried too hard, I just wanted you to believe me." Tears burned Evelyn's eyes. She had spent years hardening her heart, but this child was breaking down walls she didn't know still stood. "You don't need to prove anything," Evelyn whispered. "You've already done more than anyone could imagine." Amira shook her head faintly. "No, I promised Mama I'd use my gift. I promised Daddy I'd bring him home. I can't stop now." Her words struck Evelyn like a blade. This child carried promises too heavy even for adults. The next day in court, Evelyn felt the eyes of the city on her. Reporters scribbled, cameras flashed, whispers rippled through the crowd. The case had drawn attention, but now the rumors of the miracle girl fueled a fever that couldn't be contained. Amira sat in the front row again, her little frame too small for the burden she carried. The prosecution laid out its closing arguments with venom, painting David Johnson as a criminal unworthy of mercy. And then Richard Hale, in a calculated move, turned his attention not to evidence but to Amira. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with mock sympathy, "we all see the poor little girl here desperate to save her father. But this is not a fairy tale. This is the law, and no child's wild claims should sway justice." He smirked directly at Evelyn, even if some people in positions of power have entertained her delusions. Gasps filled the courtroom, all eyes turned to the judge. Evelyn's face remained stoic, but her heart thundered. Amira stood suddenly, her voice trembling but strong. "It's not a delusion, my daddy is innocent and I can prove it." The courtroom erupted, bailiffs rushed forward, but Evelyn raised her hand. "Let the child speak." Amira stepped into the aisle, clutching her locket. She turned toward the jury, her voice rising above the murmurs. "My daddy didn't rob anybody, he was fixing a car that night. I know, because I went to the garage with him. I fell asleep on a bench, and when I woke up he was still there with a man who brought his car late." Gasps echoed again. Evelyn leaned forward. "You were there?" Amira nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I saw the man. He had a blue hat with a tear on the side." The courtroom froze. Richard Hale's face blanched. Because only one person had been questioned who matched that description, and Hale had buried his testimony. "Order," Evelyn barked, slamming her gavel, but her own mind was reeling. This wasn't just a child's plea, it was the missing piece, the truth. That evening, alone in her chambers, Evelyn wrestled with the weight of it all. The law demanded proof, the system demanded conformity, but the truth demanded courage. And then, as if sensing her turmoil, Amira slipped quietly into the room. "You're scared," she said softly. Evelyn exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "Yes, I am. If I do what's right, I could lose everything. My career, my name, everything I built." Amira walked over and placed her tiny hands on Evelyn. "Sometimes, to do what's right, you gotta lose something. My mama said the truth always costs something, but it's worth it." The judge's throat tightened. This child, who had already lost so much, understood more about justice than many grown men in suits. The final day of the trial arrived. The courtroom overflowed with reporters, spectators, and skeptics. Everyone expected drama. Few expected what they were about to witness. Judge Evelyn Carter's voice was steady as she read her verdict. After reviewing the testimony, the evidence, and the new revelation provided by a key witness, this court finds David Johnson. She paused, her chest tightening. Innocent of all charges. The courtroom exploded. Some cheered, some shouted, some cursed. David's eyes filled with tears as he collapsed to his knees, whispering prayers of gratitude. Amira ran to him, hugging him tightly. "I told you, Daddy, I told you I'd bring you home." And then something happened that silenced the entire room. Evelyn Carter stood. At first, no one noticed, but then a gasp rose from the front row. Slowly, shakily, the judge pushed herself up from her wheelchair. Her legs trembled unsteady, but they held. Gasps turned into screams, shouts, tears. Cameras flashed wildly. Amira stood nearby, her hands still outstretched, her little body shaking with exhaustion but her face radiant. "She's healed," someone whispered. "No," Evelyn said, her voice breaking as she clutched the bench for support. "She is a miracle." News spread like wildfire. The paralyzed judge walked again, the little girl with a gift. The innocent man was freed. Some called it divine, others called it madness. The city was divided, but no one could deny what they had seen. For Evelyn Carter, it was the beginning of a new life. No longer just a judge bound by the rigid chains of law, she became a woman awakened to truth. For David Johnson, it was a second chance, though the scars of injustice lingered. And for Amira, sweet, fragile Amira, it was both a triumph and a burden. Her gift was no longer a secret. The world would chase her, demand from her, maybe even fear her. But as she walked hand in hand with her father out of the courthouse, her locket pressed against her chest, she whispered softly to herself, "Mama, I kept my promise." Months later, Evelyn Carter stood in her garden, no longer in a wheelchair. She walked slowly with a cane, but she walked. Amira visited often, sometimes laughing, sometimes sitting silently, her big eyes reflecting burdens too old for her years. One afternoon, Evelyn knelt to the girl's level, her voice gentle. "Child, you changed my life, but are you sure you're ready for what's coming? The world will want to use you." Amira smiled faintly, her innocence untouched. "The world didn't give me this gift, God did, and as long as I use it for Him, I'll be okay." Evelyn hugged her tightly, tears filling her eyes. For in that moment, she realized that sometimes miracles don't just heal the body, they heal the soul, the truth, and the very meaning of justice itself.